When a pitcher is doing his very best on the mound, trying to win a game, and he's struggling, the rest of the team and hopefully the fans are still supporting him, encouraging him, empowering him to be the best pitcher that he could possibly be at that time, so that he could do all things well. But then there is the manager, who as well encourages and tries to support, is keeping his eyes on that pitcher, looking out for signs that maybe this pitcher is suffering from fatigue, or maybe the pitcher's game is just not on. And so it comes time for the manager to pull the pitcher from the mound, for his sake and also for the sake of the game. It doesn't mean that the pitcher set out to pitch miserably. He intended to do all things well. But sometimes it's just necessary for the manager to call him off the mound. Speaking of which, I'm going to give a little commercial regarding baseball, since I gave this little baseball example. At the end of this month, on Friday, we have our annual Catholic night at Chase Field, the Diamondbacks. And let me just say, last year, when we played, when we were there, we had about 3,000 Catholics there in attendance. And I'm not saying, but I'm saying that it got Diamondbacks to the World Series. So that's my little commercial pitch, and hopefully you'll be able to sign up for that this year. Go to the diocesan website. Did you see what I did there? Well, we're all called to do all things well, and so very often we come up short. We know that in our moral lives we can come up short. In our physical lives we can come up short. In our workplace lives we can come up short. In our family and our relational lives we can come up short. But we try, we do our best. We get up in the morning and we attempt to do all things well. No one wants to fall on their face. No one intends to live a miserable life. We intend to do all things well. But the good news is that at the end of the day, there are people around us who try to catch us when we are suffering, like a manager watching that pitcher. When my brother Tom died by suicide when I was just going into 8th grade, I remember, of course, going through all the grief and even the doubts and wondering whether or not I was partly responsible, and that is just another thing that happens to anyone who is a survivor of suicide loss. It's one thing when we lose someone through death, when they die an ordinary death, maybe even old age. And often we might say, gosh, I didn't say I love you enough, or something like that. And there's always this kind of a go-to thing that happens to us where we take a little guilt and, put a spotlight on that guilt in our lives and say, gosh, I should have done better. But when someone dies by suicide, it's sort of magnified, that level of guilt. And of course, I went through that as well as members of my family. That was just a natural thing. It just happens. But beyond all of that, you go through all of these other stages of grief and questioning and wondering. And as a young man, when I was just in 8th grade, I did question a couple of things as I was poring through some of the pictures of my brother Tom. And I remember there was a picture of him with braces, and a picture of him when he was in Pony League in baseball, and another picture of him when he was wrestling. And all of that, when I was considering that, I thought, my folks were behind this young man. They loved their son deeply. And they would do everything they could to make sure that he would do well in his life, never thinking, of course, that he would die by suicide. And I remember when that had happened, after he had died and some years later looking at those pictures, I wondered, perhaps like Coeleth in our scriptures, who would say, vanity of vanities, all things are vanity. What is the purpose? Why would I need braces, or why would I need to kind of excel in some kind of a sport if at the end of the day I'm just going to die? What's the difference between a rich man or a poor man, or a healthy man or a sick man, if all are going to die? And so we can throw up our arms and say, well, what's the purpose? But the purpose is that we, like a manager or like a team, gather around a pitcher who may be struggling, and we support them with love and compassion, and we let them know that they have a place in our heart. And we try to do all things well as we encourage and support those who may be struggling. We didn't know at the time that my brother Tom was probably struggling with mental health disorder when he died at age 19. And then when my sister and her husband died when I was in college, they died by suicide on a Thanksgiving morning. We discovered that. It started to dawn on us that maybe this is a real thing in our family, that there may be some mental health realities that we have to deal with. But again, the question was, why her? And maybe not me. What's going on? There are too many questions. Why my brother-in-law? My sister Therese was doing all things well. She went to Catholic school like the rest of us. She was married in the church. She participated in the life of her parish. She was a teacher in a Catholic school. She was doing all things well. It wasn't like she didn't have faith, but she died by suicide. And of course, my sister Mary, who died in 2022, after a number of attempts of suicide. I had never met a person who tried to live as much as she tried to live, each and every day, fighting to live. She did everything she could possibly do, and for that matter, I could say she had done all things well, as best as she could, as well as she could. But when we turn to our gospel today, we hear the people say about Jesus, who now opens the ears and the mouth of this person who is mute. And they say, he has done all things well. We might say, well, of course, this person whose ears are open and is unable to speak will one day die, and is not going to be able to hear or to speak in the grave. So when they were saying he has done all things well, boy, did they not know, they did not know the reality of those words, that God has done all things well, so well that when we die, we will rise again. That we are still in a very imperfect world, and we are very imperfect. But the beautiful thing about our God is that God has done all things well for our sake. God suffered and died and was placed in a grave, just as we would, in that we die. But he rose from the dead. He has done all things well. And those of us who follow, all things will be made well for us. And so we don't give up. We trust. Those of you who are survivors of suicide loss, you've done all things well. Don't lose heart. Don't question. And if you should question, really rethink that. Mental health is a thing. It's not a figment of our imagination. And as we focus on this National month of suicide prevention. We pray that the science of mental health will be ramped up, and that our government will do its best to find the funding to assist our brothers and sisters who are struggling not only with depression but with PTSD, with manic depressive disorders, and all other mental health related issues. Thankfully, we have now in the Diocese of Phoenix this wonderful office for mental health ministry. And it is there where we are realizing more and more the importance of drawing people to the faith, because there are many who might say, I have a Catholic affiliation, or I have a Lutheran affiliation, or I have a Muslim affiliation. Affiliation is one thing, but participation is another. And we begin to see that people start to have a greater sense of wellness as they gather in community. That is one thing that we have been studying, and we're certainly seeing that the studies are proving that more and more people gathering together and being loved and supported will help our mental wellness. And so we are all called to do all things well, as best as we can, as well as we can. And at the end of the day, if we don't get to where we're going, if we don't get to goal, and let me just say that we will never fully get to goal, we have to place our faith in the one who has done all things well and will bring us to the kingdom of heaven, where all will be made well. Or as we heard in our first reading from Isaiah, that the eyes of the blind will be opened, that the ears of the deaf will be cleared, that the lame will leap like a stag, that the tongue of the mute will sing, that streams will burst forth in the desert and the rivers in the steppe. The burning sands will become pools, and the thirsty ground springs of water. All will be made well. We have to trust that. That's our faith. That's what faith is. We may not be able to see it. We may not be able to fully grasp that. But we have to trust that even though the rain hides the stars, or even though the mist swirls the hills, even when the dark clouds veil the sky, God is by my side. God is by my side. And not only up there, but through each and every one of us. The beautiful song that we will be singing as we bring forth carnations, called the veil. It says, God will be at my side. And then it says, you are at my side. Who is the you? God in you. Each of you are here to help support and to love those who have lost their loved ones by suicide. Each of you who have lost your loved ones by suicide, you are offering your prayers that your sons or daughters or brothers or sisters or friends are held in the loving arms of God, who makes all things well.